I had the opportunity to read the book a couple of months ago, and I believe that this book is not just an academic book added to so many books which come out every year. It's a special book which has a very, very strong political message along with very, very strong credentials as an academic exercise, because the book is based on real factual details about Vivekananda's life. I'm saying this because Vivekananda is flaunted as a great protagonist of Hindutva philosophy and ideology, and used as a mascot by our great Hindutva political leaders. And most of the people see him as their man. If you read this book, you will find that the man belonged to a different world altogether. He didn't even speak this language, the language which is attributed to him. And neither he flaunted those ideas which are associated with him. And this book does this tremendous exercise of weaning him away from the Hindutva gang and put him in his proper place where he belonged, a philosopher of freedom, where he talked about large number of things which we need to espouse today. Unfortunately, we use other philosophers and thinkers, we don't use him. He needs to be used by large number of political leaders as well as academics to talk about Indian history, Indian philosophy, Indian religions, and so many other things which Vivekananda represented. For me, the most exciting part of the book was that it began with a promise, and that promise was fulfilled when I ended the book. It began with a promise that Vivekananda need to be brought out in his very eclectic position, where all religions, not just Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, all of them had space in his worldview, in his world, and that view was not hostile the way it is projected today. He was very empathetic to all these religions, and that is something which was revealing, which I actually didn't know, and maybe others know it or not, I don't know. But this book will surely add to our knowledge on this count tremendously. I would like to begin by requesting Govind to let us know why he took it up. Because as we know, these are difficult times, and it's not very easy to take up a project like this and to write about Vivekananda the way he has done. So what really motivated you?
First of all, thank you, Dr. Habib. So Vivekananda is someone I think in Kerala a lot of us are familiar with. He has been associated with the Kerala Renaissance that happened in the late 19th century and early 20th century. So we think of him, a lot of us think of him as a reformer. But as a journalist, when I've been working outside Kerala, the image that people have of Vivekananda, I found, was increasingly that of a Sangh Parivar man. And they think that he is kind of an orthodox Hindu figure. And not only had the right wing so successfully appropriated him, even many academics from the left had kind of written books and articles that confirmed this view of Vivekananda, that he is an orthodox thinker, that he was against conversions, that he was for Hindu pride. So many stereotypes that are too powerful to counter. But to someone who had taken the care to read Vivekananda fully, this situation is farcical. It's as if the Martin Luther King Jr. has been appropriated by, say, the Ku Klux Klan, or say, the French thinker Voltaire has been, if he's appropriated by white nationalists, is because Vivekananda is, and in my book, there's there in the below the title, the Sangh Parivar's greatest icon is his arch nemesis. So it's not merely that Vivekananda is not sympathetic to Hindu nationalism, but that he is, I mean, of course, Hindu nationalists have been appropriating a lot of figures, including Sardar Patel and Bhagat Singh. And Bhagat Singh, of course, was a Marxist. And I mean, Dr. Habib has written a book that wonderfully shows his ideology and how, and they appropriated him. But in a sense, I would think Vivekananda is more dangerous at the level of ideas to the Sangh Parivar than someone like Bhagat Singh, because though they are both opposite, Vivekananda is talking from within the Hindu tradition. And that is why I thought it was important to write such a book, because after all, Hindutva or the RSS ability to mobilize support, it depends on this idea that, look, we are speaking for Hinduism. We are his protectors. But what I think I try to say in my book, and I hope I've succeeded in proving it, is that you can either be with someone like Vivekananda and the spiritual principles that he shows are central or core to Hinduism, or you can be involved in the Sangh Parivar project. But they are opposites. You can't have your leg in both. It will be a complete contradiction. So Dr. Habib spoke about his attitude. So there are a number of salient core points on which the Sangh Parivar and Vivekananda hold polar opposite positions. One is the way they interpret Hinduism. Then there's their attitude to the West. The reasons they give for India's decline. But perhaps today, most importantly, the one we should look at is Vivekananda's attitude towards the Abrahamic faiths. Because if you look at the trajectory of Hindutva, starting from his earliest times, you read Savarkar and Golwalkar, and even someone who is more moderate, like Deen Dayal Upadhyaya, you still see, in, of course, Golwalkar and Savarkar's case is outright hostility, a deep hostility. But even down to Deen Dayal Upadhyaya, there is an othering. But with Vivekananda, like both with Christianity and Islam, his views were the exact opposite. He was not merely inclusive. I mean, what Vivekananda was really known for in his time, why he became famous at the Chicago speech, was that he talked about universal religion. He put forward this idea, which I don't think anyone had articulated so powerfully up to that point, that all religions are basically the same. They may have different theologies, mythologies, and so on, but they contain the essential truth. And in this aspect, Christianity, for example, played a deep part in Vivekananda's own life. So Vivekananda, for around 5 years, wandered all over India as an itinerant monk. As we know, he went to Kanakakumari and sat there and meditated on the future of India. So these 5 years, he traveled without any possessions. He would not carry money. He would take only food that is given as alms. But he did carry 2 books. One was the Bhagavad Gita. The other was a book called The Imitation of Christ. It was written by Thomas Kempis, a medieval monk. And this book deeply influenced Vivekananda's spiritual life, because he translated it into Bengali. And when he and his brother disciples, that is other disciples of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, they were, before he became famous and all, they were staying in a dilapidated house in Calcutta, and they were doing spiritual austerities. He used this book as a guide on monastic life. And he used to pray to both the Virgin Mary and to Christ. When he had great devotion to them, as a spiritual, what you call bhakti. So it was, Christianity was thus a part of his spiritual makeup. And intellectually, Vivekananda had this great empathy and interest in Christianity. In fact, Vivekananda once goes to Goa, where he visits the Rationality seminary. this was then just a Portuguese colony, right, Goa. And the Rachel Seminary was basically a seminary that was once run by the Jesuits, but the Portuguese ran the Jesuits out, and then it fell into Diocesian hands. So there were manuscripts, several hundred-year-old Latin manuscripts on Christianity that were left there. Vivekananda went there and spent 3 days studying these manuscripts, talking Christian theology with the priest there. And according to what reports that we have, once this word got round that this Hindu sannyasi who was interested in Christianity is there, and he's talking and debating with the priests at the monks at the seminary. Apparently dozens of priests from all over Goa came and saw him and continued this conversation. So that is the kind of devotional attitude and interest he had in Christianity. In fact, he visited Rome, and there are accounts of how overcome with emotion he was to see the basilicas, the architecture, and how he talked about the love for infant Christ. And at the intellectual level, he held Buddha and Christ to be the two greatest men to have walked the earth. So interestingly, he did not choose a figure from his own religion, but from two other religions. And coming to Islam, and Islam, now one thing is, there is a certain narrative that is being spread today. I'm sure all of you would have come across it in some form or the other, articles, novels, WhatsApp forwards, which goes something like this, that there was a Mohammedan invasion, and there was a genocide of Hindus. Thousands of temples were destroyed. Millions were converted. Now, Vivekananda was an extraordinarily well-read man, but perhaps his greatest strength was in history. And you should look at what Vivekananda says about this, and he basically says that I think if I'm quoting him correctly, he's once in a speech in South India, he tells a Hindu audience, even to the Mohammedan rule, we owe that great blessing, the destruction of exclusive privilege, caste privilege. The Mohammedan invasion came as a salvation to the poor and the downtrodden. It would be madness to think that it was all the work of sword and fire. So what he is noticing, and this several historians who have written about Islam in India, note that while people like Muhammad of Ghazni or Nadir Shah, who are very marauders, they did not want to rule India, just like they did with other countries. They invaded, they plundered, and they probably forced conversions. But once Islamic dynasties came up, there were no more, it was live and let live. And this is something Vivekananda says about, he says, what we call Islamic invasions are basically just Indians fighting among themselves, where one set of Indians are led by a Turkish military elite. Because these were basically wars between kingdoms, and often Muslim kings had Hindu allies, and they worked in their administration. So this is definitely against this false history that is being propagated today.
We'll come to that part a little later, because I thought let us talk about faiths. Like you talked about Christianity. When he talks about Islam, now I in my own book, and I have referred very briefly to Vivekananda in comparison with how Maulana Azad looked at his own faith, Islam. Both of them had an idea that these faiths should be looked at in comparative perspective. They should not be hegemonic when we interpret them. For Maulana, Islam was not a religion at a pedestal somewhere. It was a religion like all other religions. All religions had some distinctive and humanitarian features. All of them had a human angle, which actually believers of all these religions have distanced themselves from. So Vivekananda, in his own address in Chicago, which we so proudly talk about, and I am absolutely agree that it should be talked about very proudly, but we should also look at what he said. He says, and this is a comparison which I do with the Maulana Azad, he says in his address besides other things, that we need to fight fanaticism. And he is not naming any religion, Vivekananda. He is talking about fanaticism of all religions. He is not identifying Hinduism, Christianity, Islam. He is just saying fanaticism, which means human urge to kill in the name of religion, to undermine in the name of religion people belonging to other faiths. That is basically the idea. Exactly the same thing Maulana says. Said we need to be human. And Maulana talks about Rabindranath Tagore's humanity and believes that humanity is actually a primary objective of all religions. Unfortunately, we are distancing ourselves from the primary objective of our respective religions. And this is something common between the two. So I would like to ask you to talk a little more about this aspect of his, which I read in the book, and then we'll come to the history part.
So I think Vivekananda was one of those rare cases of a spiritual figure who was acutely aware of the danger that religion poses. That is, any kind of organized religion, because it creates an us and a them, and there's a lot of emotional content to it, right? So, in fact, there is a place where he says that, never get into any organized religion. And by organized, he's not referring merely to the Semitic religion. I mean, even Hinduism is quasi-organized. I mean, just a looser structure. And for him, he says, religion is between you and your God. It's an internal thing. I mean, perhaps today we would call it spirituality rather than religion. But with religion, he says that it easily degenerates into fanaticism, sectarianism, and that people would cut each other's throat, which is, he says, surprising, because religion is supposed to be about love of God and love of your fellow humans. So, what Vivekananda proposed was that one has to put reason before anything. He did believe that there were spiritual truths, but he said that you should not believe anything that contradicts what you already know by reason. So his idea of religion was grounded in rationality and even in evidence. I mean, he would sometimes say that the atheist is closer to God than the theist, because the theist just believes in God without thinking about it. While the atheist is questioning, he's struggling towards truth. So for Vivekananda, religion is not believing in something, believing in some God. It was an active, ongoing search for truth that would culminate only when you, in his opinion is that it will culminate in a direct experience, a direct spiritual experience, where you'll be in a position to say, I know this because I have experienced it. And till that, he says, what you call faith cannot be something blind. It has to be something, like you might have a hypothesis. You might believe, okay, there is a God, he is loving and all that. But once it turns into a hardened opinion, once you give it a name, you attach certain emotions to it, it will degenerate into fanaticism and bigotism. And in fact, there is an interesting place where he says that, and this is in the context of the Ram Janmabhoomi, because what are the assumption of Ram Janmabhoomi? It is that Ram is God, Rama is God. He was born, and the Ramayana gives a true history of Rama, that he was God on earth, he was born in Ayodhya, and hence we need a temple there. Now, this is one of those places where history and what religious fanaticism coincide. And there's something Vivekananda says about all these things which I think will allow us to infer what his position would have been if he had been alive today. Because he says in one place, temples have absolutely no hold on the Hindu religion. If all the temples in India were destroyed, Hinduism would not be affected a grain. Of course, he did not mean that we should go around breaking up temples. But what he's saying is that whether it's temples or books or symbols, all these are just all the paraphernalia, external paraphernalia of religion. And always the fighting is about these paraphernalia, these symbols, about the name of a god, about a place. All these are merely because the idea of God, of something infinite, is too abstract. And human beings need something to represent it, something that will bring up that idea by association. So you use some symbols. And these, in that sense, a temple is only an aid. and a kind of a tool that will help direct your mind to the divine. There's nothing special about one particular temple. It's just stone. I mean, there's nothing in it. To imagine that there's something special about a temple would be to basically materialize the spiritual. And then he goes on to say that no personality. So one of the things that Hinduism was attacked for at that time by Christian missionaries was that there was no proof of any of the gods of Hinduism. It's not that Christ was historical or Muhammad or Buddha. But Vivekananda says that, look, this is the strength of Hinduism. That the truth of our religion is not bound to any personality. Because if it is, tomorrow historical evidence might come that cast doubt on whether such personalities lived, whether they said these things. So ours is a religion based on principles. And and he also said very clearly that there is no historical evidence that any of these Puranic characters, including Krishna and I suppose by extension Rama, had ever lived. And he says this historical research is very essential, not because it will contribute to spirituality, but because one should always aim at truth in every domain of one's existence, whether it's political, social, or religious.
Yeah, so we come to a little more contested part of our history, which is being contested every day, every other day, because today we engage more with the past than with the present, because we are almost placed in at least medieval India, because we don't go beyond that. It is only medieval India which matters, because that concerns our present political fortunes. So we talk about all sorts of things about this medieval past. I was very intrigued and surprised to see the views of Vivekananda in this book, where he has an absolutely different impression of the Mughal period and the medieval period. And I'm surprised that all those who vouch for him all the time do not care to even read a sentence what he wrote about medieval India, and how closely, how dearly he looked at the aesthetics of the Mughal period. And like he goes in 1893, he goes to Agra, and along with his some American friends, and talks about Taj Mahal. He said, no, you need to have 1 week to describe the beauty of Taj Mahal, and then has great words about Akbar as an emperor who was pluralist in his ideas, who gave scope to all religions, space to all religions. So there was something like this all over about that medieval period, which runs contrary to what we talk about that period all the time. Today, that period has become a Hindu-Muslim conflict zone, and nothing more than that. We just don't want to see anything else in that period. Now, for a history student like me, Malabai, I always say that medieval period, or any period for that matter, emperors always ran the country as a collaborative project. There were Hindu mansabdars right from the early times till the Mughal period. It was a collaborative project. It was neither Hindu nor Muslim. We impute religion today to all these characters of the period. They were running an efficient government. What is the religion of the mansabdar or the emperor didn't really matter. So Vivekananda brings out this particular aspect so beautifully in his writings and in his travels, and Govind brings that out so beautifully. And unfortunately, there are few people in our present day dispensation who are powerful. They don't read their own icons whom they espouse all the time. I wish they read it, particularly this part of history which Vivekananda brings out so beautifully.
What I found really interesting is this, that so the British did not rule merely by military force, right? It is also at the level of ideas, like Edward Said first brought out. You delegitimize the civilization of the colonized. You tell them that your religion, your culture is all second rate. And part of this was the idea that Indians never had good kings, never had a good administrations. So the British narrative actually vilified the Mughals, especially because after the revolt of 1857 and Bahadur Shah Safar's whatever his role in it was, there was a strong feeling that the Muslims would revolt again. So as part of that, and as part of the general product of delegitimizing Indian history, they claimed that the Mughals were incompetent rulers, that they were tyrants. So despite this official history, Vivekananda had, I mean, his reading is still a mystery to me, because I don't know how this man managed to read so much at such a young age, because he was just 30 when he goes to the Parliament of Religions. And what exactly are his sources? Because the amount of historical information that he displays in his work is quite astonishing. And he correctly says of the Mughals that they were excellent rulers. And he has praise for not only Akbar, whom he considered along with Ashoka to be the greatest emperors India had, but he had praise for Babur, Humayun, and about Shah Jahan. He said that he was the glory of his line. He had a sensibility for beauty that is unparalleled in history. Apparently, Vivekananda had come across a manuscript that was supposed to be, I think, a calligraph that was done by Shah Jahan's hand. So this so he used to talk about Indian history to his American friends and disciples, all eras. But one of those disciples says that the Mughals especially seem to have cast a spell on Swamiji. He was fascinated by the Mughals, and that when he talked about, if you read the book, there are so many passages where Vivekananda goes on about Mughal history, and this disciple says that at times we thought he was talking about his past, because that was the power with which he evoked these historical characters. I find it very fascinating that in spite of the fact that there was an existing historical narrative against the Muslim rule, though a lot of people in the Hindu community at that time considered the Islamic rule as a time of retrogression, Vivekananda came to the right view and he held it and talked about it so firmly.
No, there is a section, chapter in your book which talks about Ambedkar, especially the idea of democracy. And what were these views which you try to bring in Vivekananda and Ambedkar on the idea of democracy?
So, Ambedkar is, of course, anyone who has read Ambedkar knows that he was a very, very harsh critic of Hinduism. And, of course, there's I found a lot of commonalities between Vivekananda and Ambedkar's thought on certain points, though they are exact opposites, right? He is a Hindu monk, he thinks very highly of Hinduism, and he blames the caste system on Hindu society, not on Hindu religion, while Ambedkar is known for his position that it is Hindu religion that is responsible for caste. But nonetheless, both blame Brahmanism for the caste system. They also saw that Indian society was deeply unjust. Vivekananda blamed, to talk about current history, we have this thing, for 1,000 years we have been slaves. Vivekananda too said that, but he didn't mean British conquerors or for Islamic conquerors. He said this happened because of the oppression of the upper caste. He was one of those few, I cannot think of any figures from the Hindu tradition at that time who says this and repeatedly says this, that the upper castes are responsible for the misery that the country is going through today. And interestingly, there is so Vivekananda was a Vedantist, he was an Advaitist, and he valued it very highly. Now, Advaita is a philosophy that the individual soul, God or the supreme reality, they call it Brahman, and the universe are actually the same. It's a philosophy of non-duality. And for Vivekananda, this philosophy had radical egalitarian implications. So, once he talks in a talk in America, he said, there's a greater chance of you become Vedantins than India, because in India the king still rules while the king has gone out of your country. So he associated individual liberty with the idea of Mukti of freedom, that Hindu theology is supreme goal. So the thing is, and interestingly, Ambedkar in his Riddles of Hinduism very uniformly criticizes Hinduism. There's this point where he asks this question. So when his basic claim is that Hinduism as a religion is structurally inegalitarian, that it is oppressive, but then he says this. So does this mean that the Hindus had no idea of democracy? And then he goes on to say that would not be correct, and he points to the Upanishadist monism, that statements Tattvamasi, Aham Brahmasmi, and Sarvam Kalvadam Brahmam, and says that this theory is a surer foundation of democracy than that of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Because if we are all part of the same cosmic principle, then democracy is not merely an something you have to do. It is an obligation, because the other person is only you. That you are, the difference you see is illusory. And this is interesting because Vivekananda made the same claim. He thought that Advaita was the most powerful philosophy for egalitarianism, because you have to see the other human being not as merely your equal, but as God himself. And this convergence in their thought, the fact that they both come to these conclusions independently, and that Ambedkar comes to it in spite of his real anger at Hinduism. I thought it was interesting, and it is also interesting that Vivekananda should talk about democracy and individual rights, the rights of the individual, from the point of view of Advaita. So because generally liberalism has a bad name in India, not only now under the present dispensation, but there's always been a conservative resistance to the idea of individual freedom. I think we are a very controlling society. We like to control individuals, and liberalism is often clumped with Western individualism, and even democracy. They say, yeah, democracy is great, but Indian culture, we have to have kind of a limited democracy. But Vivekananda derives these ideas of both egalitarianism as well as of equality and the right of the individual to exist as they want from Hindu philosophy, so that it serves as part of the Indian tradition. So it's not only a Western import. He says these ideas are at least in their embryonic form present in the Indian tradition.
Another interesting thing which I found and which I think we should discuss is Vivekananda's observations about women in America. There is a whole issue of gender, and he passes some, like he indicts all those who are oppressing women in India, and he is very very clear. He is saying this in US. Today, you will be charged of anti-national activity, and if you go and talk critically about anything about India, outside India. So he was saying this in the late 19th, early 20th century, and he is trying to say that how different American women are, how liberated, how empowered they are compared to women here back in India. And he gives detailed expressions to his experiences which he went through. And in one of the chapters, Govind deals with that in quite detail. I think you need to share that, because we need to discuss these things. These are all present concerns, which keep happening. Debates keep happening, and we keep flaunting all sorts of things from our past. And Vivekananda is, I think, the best person to give us the clear picture.
So Vivekananda is somehow considered a kind of a very masculine figure, obviously the Hindu right wants him to be, because there is a very masculine anti-feminist element to Hindu ethnic, the project of Hindu ethnic majoritarianism. But interestingly, from the left also recently, there has been several critiques of Vivekananda as someone who is patriarchal, against women's rights. So what I found was that these kind of readings are those readings of Vivekananda that think that he is somehow colluding in patriarchy and all that are extremely ahistorical, because Vivekananda was living and his career is the very end of the 19th century. Queen Victoria dies just 6 months before Vivekananda. And for a person of that time, his views on women were extraordinarily ahead. He supported women's suffrage, which so many of Western intellectuals did not, including people who, women who championed for women's rights, like famous feminists like Violet Markham or Beatrice Webb. They were anti-suffragettes. And Vivekananda says this even before the suffrage movement starts. He says that I see no reason whatsoever that women should not be given the right to vote. And he, in his Chicago address, there was a speech about the condition of women in the idea of women in Hinduism. And he says that the best thermometer of a nation's progress is treatment of women. And that the idea of perfect womanhood is the idea of perfect independence. And he tremendously admired the American women he met because they were independent, they were dynamic, very well educated. And he found their, more than anything, their sense of self-resilience, their sense of independence, extremely amazing. And I mean, he writes, there are several letters in which he writes about how impressed he is. And in one letter he tells his brother disciples that, if I could raise 1,000 women in India who has the spirit of these American women, I will die in peace because I know that I would have contributed to my country. And interestingly again, he derives his idea from the Advaita philosophy. He says, is there any sex distinction between in the Atman? Is there any man or woman in the Atman? That is, Atman is the self, which is identical to God. So this is just something that we just notice at the level of the body. And I will not rest content till I root out this distinction between man and woman. And I mean, I was not in Kerala at that time, but I did follow a bit of the debate about the Sabarimala issue. And I often wondered, given that Vivekananda took Advaita as his point of departure, if instead of a secularism versus faith debate, one had a debate where you look at it from within the Hindu tradition itself, at least as Vivekananda interpreted it. So we go to Sabarimala. I think there is a board that says, Tattvamasi. Now the thing is, that is the classic statement of Advaita. And again, Vivekananda derives women's rights from Advaita. So you are basically saying Tattvamasi is thou art that ultimate reality. So you are saying that every person is that. There is nothing else. Now, if you proclaim this, what does it even mean to say the deity here does not want the presence of women? I mean, you are proclaiming a philosophy that erases the distinction even between the worshipper and God. There is a place where Vivekananda says, look, when you pray, you should say, God, I am not capable of thinking, realizing you too. I apologize for thinking of you as separate as myself, as separate from myself. So, again, from what are traditional philosophies, Vivekananda derives a philosophy of freedom and emancipation. And it's not only at the spiritual level, but he applied it across the board to the political, the social, and all the educational, all aspects of being, and especially he talked of it in relation to the Indian situation. And with several women's rights campaigners, he would say, why are you asking me whether women should do this or that? That's for the women to decide. Our job is only to give them the opportunity and remove the obstacles. Whether women will marry or not marry, whether they'll do this and that, I'm sure the women can decide for themselves. Women can decide their fate much better than men can. And all the trouble, all the oppression women have faced has happened because men decided their destiny instead of women.
I have come across a statement by Swami Vivekananda lamenting the forced conversion by Islam. Look what it has done for the sake of religion. You have anything to say?
Because, first of all, the idea of a forced conversion is something I don't think Vivekananda would have ever used, because it is if you think about it, the concept, what is a forced conversion? I mean, unless, suppose you put a gun to someone's head and say, if you don't convert, I'll shoot you. Can the person may say, okay, I am, unless you do something of that kind, what is a forced conversion? Because you're talking about belief, right? You can't force someone to change their belief. And secondly, Vivekananda's views on conversion. So this is something that is said a lot about Vivekananda, that somebody was against conversions. Vivekananda never said the Western missionaries should not preach in India. In fact, there is this place where in the US he's asked, what is your views on our missionaries trying to convert? And he said, let missionaries of Christ come to India by the thousands. Let life of Jesus be preached in every home. And he was as good as his word. When Dr. Barrows, who was a preacher at the World's Parliament of Religions, wanted to come to India, Vivekananda arranged a public reception for him. He wrote in the Indian Mirror praising that, of course, he didn't say that, you please convert to this man's religion. What he said was, I'm sure that the system of the Jesus of Nazareth that he's going to preach would be very elevating for us. And there's also another fact. When he came to Kerala, in fact, he called it a lunatic asylum. Malabar, he was called Malabar then. He says Malabar is a lunatic asylum. And he says 1/3 of our people have converted to Christianity. And he said, how can they not? Because he was sharp enough to see that both with Islam and Christianity, a lot of conversions happened because people wanted freedom from the caste system. And he says to the Hindus, look, if you don't do it, what are you doing? He's telling Hindus, all you say is don't touch, don't touch. Obviously they will convert. How can you blame them? That was his view as far as I can.
Regarding Islam, he has mentioned, not about Christianity.
I mean, conversions.
Islam. He is talking about Islam.
One thing that he has, I have not come across a comment about Islamic conversions, but he does talk about at one place that the Muslims were the worst at killing, he says something like it was the Bible, the Quran in one hand and the sword in the other. He was talking about the Arab expansion, not the conquest of India, but the 7th century expansion of the Arab rule. But if you read the whole speech, he starts out with defending Islam against Christianity and tells Christians hate no other religion in the world as much as Islam. And he goes on to say what wrong notions of Islam Christianity has. And then he comes to this religious violence. And then he mentions this. And to be fair to Vivekananda, his only source of information then was from British and American historians. So what happens then is they know that the conquest starts under the immediate successor of the Prophet, Abu Bakr, right? And the Sasanian Empire is weak, so is the Byzantine Empire, and they conquer a lot of this in one go. So what did these Christian historians do? Because Christianity has a history in Europe of conversion by force, where basically you are threatened to be killed, as I said. So they think, okay, expansions happened, they all converted, so it must have been by force. And that was the history that was known to Vivekananda then. But if you look at the history that comes later, when by around, I suppose, the 1920s, 30s, Orientalist historians are looking at original Arabic and Persian sources, it becomes clear that there are hardly any forced conversions. In fact, in those times, the Arabs thought of Islam basically as an ethnic religion, as a revelation given only to the Arabs. The process of conversion, people converting to Islam happened almost 50 to a century after the conquest of the Middle East lands. So if at all Vivekananda held this view, so that he said it in a context where he was actually defending Islam against Christianity, and his historical knowledge was inadequate.
My question is it possible to analyze? Is it possible to analyze Swami Vivekananda through this materialistic view. He was talking about the non-dualism, atmic principle, the consciousness and super-consciousness. And when we analyze through this bookish knowledge, you know what I mean? There are many kinds of knowledge, bookish knowledge, this general knowledge, practical knowledge, discriminatory knowledge, and spiritual knowledge. Somebody beyond all these things, you know, you said that he is aware about all those things when he read, because it was from self-awareness he was talking. And he talked about this, you know, Christianity and Buddha, because he was talking about the Christ consciousness, Buddha consciousness,
Yes.
higher consciousness in everyone.
Right.
So is it possible to analyze about Vivekananda? His change started after Ramakrishna Paramahamsa touched his feet. Materially, we can't explain these things. The subtle things, you know, I mean, that is there.
See, one thing is for sure, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa practiced Islam and Christianity for a short, brief while. And he said, at the end of it, I had the same experience as I had when I practiced various forms of Hinduism. And Sri Ramakrishna was a powerful influence on Vivekananda. That we can say. And also Vivekananda was a brilliant chap, an exceptional mind. So I don't know, but I'm not saying that these factors that you mentioned may not be present, but I'm saying that we can account for Vivekananda's views even without invoking the superconscious and that. I mean, I take this chance mainly because it's something about which I have no knowledge, right? I mean, I have not experienced superconsciousness. I don't know whether it exists except by some second-hand accounts. So as a historian, what I try to do is kind of steer clear from those claims, neither judging them to be false or true. And if I can account for a particular event or view of Vivekananda without them, I've tried to give those explanations instead.
Just to add, actually, what Jesus said, you know, I mean, about the human evolution. I'm the messenger of God, I'm the son of God, and I and my Father are one. The same thing is Prophet also said, I am in the light is in me, I'm the light.
Yeah.
This is the evolution all these spiritual masters talked about. So, in my view, this is the basic understanding, the subtle thing, you know, which we can't explain through the books.
Yeah, that's quite right. In fact, Vivekananda does quote the Christ saying that I and my Father are one. He interprets this as an Advaitic statement where he says, I am one with God. That's true.
Maybe the last question.
Hi, I knew very little about Vivekananda before I came here, so it was very enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Like you just said, there is quite a bit of conservative resistance to liberal movements. Personally, I'm an atheist, but I still have a lot of love for religion, including a certain amount of grudge against it. And it is quite demoralizing to see how people talk about Islam these days, especially given the current situation, not only in India, but also certain places abroad. Do you think, all those things considered, with the type of guy Vivekananda was, would he be a popular person today in India right now? Would he be appealing to people right now, or would he be more of like a controversial figure?
I think he would be an extremely controversial figure. In fact, the way our country is headed now, where someone files a case at the drop of a hat saying that religious sentiments, quote unquote, has been hurt, many of the things Vivekananda has said, I don't see how he could have said them and stayed out of prison. Because he did say these things about cow slaughter, about beef eating, that, no one would, without, without wanting to risk jail, could now say out in public. I think it would be a very controversial figure now.